Hello and welcome to USA 2024 on the road. It's Friday, and that means you join our team here in America as we count down to the presidential election in just 17 days' time. I'm James Matthews, currently by the side of Route 13. Having done some filming in North Carolina, we're on our way back to Washington, D.C.
And I'm Mark Stone in Detroit, Michigan, where we've been examining the black vote after some pretty controversial comments by Barack Obama.
I've been looking at rhetoric, Donald Trump's rhetoric specifically, which has hardened recently. In terms of coverage, that hasn't all been cordial.
Sorry, but that's garbage. Who are you with? What's your name?
Well, my name is James Matthews. We're
James
from
Matthews.
Sky News. More of that later. But in this race, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are genuinely neck and neck. The race really couldn't be tighter. We'll be joined by NBC's legendary data man, Steve Kornacki, who's taking a break from his big board to give us his assessment of the race. Welcome to USA 2024 on the road. As we inch closer to Election Day, Kamala Harris is trying to nail down a group of voters once considered a core part of the Democratic base, black men. She had former President Obama speak as a surrogate for her last week in Pennsylvania, trying to encourage black men to vote. While he was there, Obama suggested it wasn't Harris's policy, but the fact that she was a woman that was turning black men away.
We have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. Mm-hmm. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that.
Mark, you headed to Detroit earlier this week to find out what voters there have made of it. Why Detroit?
Well, look, honestly, Detroit and Michigan in general is a fascinating place. Obviously, it's a swing state. It is a state that both candidates want to win. It has 15 electoral college votes. That is a number that both parties want to add to the tally to get to that key number, 270 votes that would propel them to the White House. And there's a really interesting demographic here, three demographics, in fact, in Michigan, which both parties are trying to secure. There is the black vote, a large African-American population here in Michigan. There is the Arab-American vote that we will be talking about a lot next week. And there is a white working class vote as well. Barack Obama's comments last week were specifically directed to the brothers, as he called them, to black men who he was concerned about. It set the hairs running. It was controversial for two reasons, I think. It reflected clearly huge concern among the Democrats that they may not have the so-called black vote in the bag. But also I thought it reflected a certain arrogance because he was suggesting a couple of things. He was saying that just because she is black folk should automatically vote for her. The other thing I thought was interesting is that he was suggesting that young black men might not want to vote for Harris because she's a woman. Well, that seemed to be forgetting the fact that an overwhelming majority of young black men voted for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. So I don't think it is actually the fact that she is a woman. It runs deeper than that. And to find out what it was all about, we went to the 180 Church on the edge of Detroit, and we met Pastor Lorenzo Sewell.
Souls to the polls every Friday. You see that?
Yeah.
That's us.
This is your church.
Oh, yeah, we do it.
Lorenzo became a bit of a star in the Republican Party during the Republican Party convention in Milwaukee a few months ago. He was invited by Donald Trump to speak there.
President Trump came to a church that is in a Democratic stronghold. He came to a church to listen to average, everyday Americans like you and like me.
So not only was Lorenzo invited to the Republican National Convention, but Donald Trump came to his church. The two prayed together. There was a large congregation. And I asked Lorenzo about that moment. And I put it to him that, many people see Donald Trump as an out-and-out racist. They see him as a dog whistler to white supremacists. So how could it be the case that he feels comfortable voting for Donald Trump?
Of course there are things that President Trump says that I don't like because I'm a Christian, right? I'd prefer them to say it a different way, but I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm voting for a leader.
Let me pick up with some of what Barack Obama was saying, because he was pretty full on the other day. You know, he was saying the brothers are not coming out like they should be. What did you make? Did you watch that? What did you make of it?
You know, President Barack Obama, I like him personally, politically, horrible. He could have walked in and said, listen, up under my administration, Vice President Harris is going to do the same thing. But he's done nothing for us up under his administration. What did he do? What did he do for black people? It's almost like they want to wave him like a magic wand. They want to say, like, it's almost like they want to seduce us with Obama to say, oh, President Obama, now you got to vote. Now you got to vote for Vice President Harris. Do they think we don't have political prowess? We may be poor and black, but that doesn't mean we're stupid. Our community needs access to resources. That's what we need. And we know that Vice President Harris, she had an opportunity to do it, and she did not. I don't know why no one's ever asked her that question. And we know that our former president, President Donald Trump, we know that he gave access to those resources.
So life was better, you think,
100%.
under Trump?
Life was better under President Trump. Gas was cheaper. I know that my bills were cheaper. And I know that people had more money to give to the church. That I do know.
Interesting. She is working performance and policy, isn't she? Going after the black vote, doing interviews on popular black platforms like the Gossip Blog, the Shade Room, radio show The Breakfast Club. She's also released this opportunity agenda for black men. That includes policies like providing over 1 million loans for black entrepreneurs, championing education and training so that black men can get high-paying jobs.
Yeah, and that's why, of the proportion, a majority of black men who are going to vote for her, that's why they're frustrated. They see opportunity in Kamala Harris. They see a leader. They see someone that they would want their, quote, brothers all to vote for. And they echoed some of what Barack Obama was saying. Come on, guys, get out there. Let's vote for Harris. She is the future. And we really got a sense of that at a bar in downtown Detroit.
Hi, I'm Quentin James, the president and founder of the Collective PAC. We support black candidates around the country. I've helped over 500 get elected to office in the past 8 years.
We've only been here a few hours in town, but already I've met 3 black men just by chance. The Uber driver was the last one I just met, and he said he's for Trump. They're all for Trump, so that's worrying, right?
Well, look, we have a lot of work to do. We got 3 weeks left, and she's not taking any vote for granted. And so, yes, there are black men who support Donald Trump. We know that. But in the past presidential elections, it's been about 12% of African Americans, and not more than that. So we understand that, we expect that, but she's fighting for every single vote right now, and we're going to do the same thing over the next 3 weeks.
I think most black men in America are determining not do they want to vote for Kamala or Trump. It's do they want to vote for the vice president or stay home?
When you look at Donald Trump, again, you find a lot of platitudes and generalities. And there is more concrete policy with Kamala.
It's imperative that we win Michigan at all costs. And there's really only one choice. Vice President Harris is the candidate of decency, integrity, and for the people.
The problem I'm sort of finding as I travel around, not just Michigan but elsewhere, is that she may be all of those things, but people are voting on the economy, on their back pocket, and they like decency, but they're not going to pay for it.
But they like common sense, and people are good judges of character in general context, and so I don't believe that there's a problem. I believe the American people will speak up on November 5th, and we'll have a new president, and her name will be President Kamala Harris.
So that there was the former Democratic Party state senator in Michigan, Marshall Bullock. And I think for me, that question goes to the heart of it. People, they may well want decency. They may well have concerns about Donald Trump. But ultimately, it comes down to the economy. People want lower taxes. They want higher salaries. They want inflation to come down. And a majority of them, in certain quarters, certainly seem to be looking to Donald Trump for that.
Now, let's take a look towards Donald Trump. This week, I've been looking at his rhetoric. It's long had an authoritarian edge, but in recent days even more so.
And I'm hereby calling for the death penalty for any migrant that kills an American citizen or law enforcement officer. Death penalty. It's time. Your children are in danger. They can't go to school with these people. These people are from a different planet. Kamala is turning us into a third world nation.
That's Donald Trump at a rally in Coachella in California. It's the kind of thing we've heard from Donald Trump as he starts to close his campaign. I think it's a clear appeal to his voter base, certainly, to stir enthusiasm, get the vote out. His language fuels the charge, from his opponents certainly, that he's an autocrat in waiting. It's echoed in a new book written by Bob Woodward of Woodward and Bernstein fame, the Washington Post duo who, of course, exposed the Watergate scandal. What do you think, Kylan?
We're not feeling good about our odds, but I'm happy we tried.
That sound you hear is my colleagues and I on K Street in Washington, D.C., outside the offices of the Washington Post. Inside, Bob Woodward was doing interviews about his new book. I wanted to speak to him about it because he quotes retired General Mark Milley as labeling Trump fascist to the core and the most dangerous person to America. This from somebody who was chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Donald Trump's senior military advisor. Mr. Woodward, I'm James Matthews from Sky News.
Hi, how are you?
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to see you.
Long-time fan.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's me fanboying it with Bob Woodward. Sorry about that. He is a journalistic icon. We doorstepped him, actually, because we hadn't had an answer from his PR team. And I'd seen him on TV the night before. He dedicated this new book to his former colleague, Carl Bernstein, who he said on TV taught him the rule number one in journalism: be aggressive. Sometimes, said Woodward, you just have to show up. So we showed up and we had a chat. What do you think General Milley's comments say about Donald Trump's fitness to be president?
Well, Milley, who just says he's an absolute fascist and a danger to the country, and Milley was the number one military man in the country, somebody revered by all kinds of military leaders and enlisted people and so forth. And so tell the public what this very respected, tough-minded general thinks about Donald Trump.
You're a man who's been around a few elections and seen a few would-be presidents. What do you think Donald Trump's language?
You know, I've written a very long book that's got all these details in it, and I'm going to let that stand, okay? Thank you.
All right, Mr. Brewer,
thank you.
Well, nice to have met you. We left him in D.C., and then we went to gauge the view of another military man. We've just crossed the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., on our way to Alexandria now to see retired Major General Randy Manner. He's a man who's known senior positions in the military. Just looking at his bio, served in Kuwait, facilitated the withdrawal of US forces from Iraq in 2010. Hello there. Hi, James.
Hi, Randy.
Nice to meet you. Hi. We joined in his basement. There was a lot going on inside that particular room. You can hear it. He has a train set about 4 meters squared beneath the mementos from a military career spanning more than 3 decades.
Sure. So our organization is called the National Security Leaders for America.
They are retired members of the military, all of whom have held senior positions. They span the political spectrum. The term fascist is one that Major General Manner recognized.
So I have to tell you that I'm so very proud of General Milley's comments to Bob Woodward. It took a lot of courage for him to say that. I had family members, I've had extended friends reach out to me and say, what are you saying? That Trump's a fascist? And I said, okay, let's pull up the Webster definition. So let's see. And these are not in order, but for example, it's nationalistic, so check. That's what Trump and his MAGA people are. Number 2 is it's very conservative, far right, check. It demands adherence to following a central leader who is all-knowing, check, we got that one. They don't deal with dissent. You either follow the leader's guidance or you are the enemy, check, that's what they do. And you act on the supremacy of either a race and or religion. Well, check, check. white people and also Christians, Christian nationalists, far right. So I ask all of your viewers to look it up yourself. This is not a term that was used loosely by General Milley. General Milley is extremely well educated. He uses his words concisely and appropriately. And it is absolutely 100% true, according to the definition in Webster, that Trump is a fascist.
An alarming take on Donald Trump's language and how that might translate into action. What's your biggest seller here?
So it would be our fight, fight, fight shirts with the image of him with the bloody ear.
So what do Republican voters say about this? At an airfield in Wilmington, North Carolina, we attended a rally by J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, and we spoke to some of those who were in attendance.
What's your name, ma'am? Lisa Lavoie.
What do you make of rhetoric by Donald Trump? Yeah, we spoke about opponents being the enemy of the people.
Well, I can see how he would say that the Democrat Party is the enemy of the people because they're trying to turn our country into a socialist nation, and we're not. We are a republic. We're not even a democracy. We are a republic. And the Democrat Party is trying to change that, and that would make them an enemy of the people.
Do you worry that Donald Trump does have fascist tendencies?
No, not at all. Donald Trump is going to save this country and keep us from going to fascism and socialism.
Listen, show me an angel. I'll show you an angel that doesn't speak language. I mean, come on. He's not an angel. He's a man that is in business and he loves God. What's the problem?
Described as a fascist by General Mark Milley, the former
General Milley's
chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
As far as I'm concerned, stars are bought. They're not earned. Trump earned his position in life. See, the swamp don't want him in there because the swamp knows once he gets in, he's cleaning house. Yeah. By the way, swampies, you're going bye-bye.
What about that, the talk about using the military and...
Who?
Donald Trump.
He doesn't have the military.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an army. He has warriors. They're different. Warriors are under the command of one person. Listen, Jesus Christ leads us all. I don't care what any of the five-star generals believe, but they're not God.
They don't understand fascism if they think he is a fascist. That's my training is in historical research, and Donald Trump does not fall into that category.
What about the dehumanizing language against immigrants, the undermining of national institutions designed to keep power in check? He himself has said, "I will be a dictator on day one."
That was taken out of context. That was not what he was alluding to. It's very easy to cut and slice. Again, I worked at a recording studio in my past, and I know what you can do.
I'm Dan Bishop. I'm currently the United States representative for the 8th District of North Carolina. The spelling of the name is D-A-N-B-I-S-H-O-P, and I'm running for Attorney General of North Carolina.
Congressman Dan Bishop, a Republican congressman, he was at the rally, and we took the opportunity to ask him a couple of questions. What do you think of Donald Trump describing opponents as the enemy within and floating the idea of using the National Guard or the military?
I saw in the New York Times today a headline to that effect that Donald Trump is escalating his rhetoric or his threats against political opponents. It seems amazing to me that a media that has incited at this point 2 assassination attempts against him and the Democrats who they ally with the rhetoric, the kind we've never seen about threats to democracy, which is constant, that they would try to reverse field on that and suggest that he says they're the enemy within or whatever, some 2 phrases, and suddenly that's a big issue. I think it's absurd, and it's a sign of close media alliance with the Democrats for the purpose of prompting them into office.
If I can read you the quote from the interview, Donald Trump said, "I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. We have some very bad people, we have some sick people, radical left lunatics." He said it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. He was talking about trouble on election day. What did he mean by that, do you think?
I don't know. You'd have to ask President Trump what he meant.
Do you think the contents of that interview fit with the description by General Mark Milley of Donald Trump as a fascist?
Mark Milley, I mean, look at your sources. I think your sources are telling in terms of the direction of your questions. Have you put a camera in Democrats' face and urged them to tell you what they think about Donald Trump being called a threat to democracy in any of 1,000 comments by political figures on the left or media? I think it's an absurd contention.
I suppose the question is...
The congressman's got another interview.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.
That was Dan Bishop, Republican representative in the House, and the sound of somebody I assume was his press aide. He never did introduce himself.
And you're going to ask him bullshit questions like that? I'm sorry, but that's garbage. Who are you with? What's your name?
Well, my name is James Matthews. That's how that particular conversation ended. But, you know, the language of this election is an issue. Kamala Harris has certainly turned back to it. Trump extremism, as she would have it. We've had her joyful opportunity campaigning phase. Now she's pivoted back onto the threat to democracy. The response of the Trump campaign is, well, you want fascism, look at the Democrats. A weaponized justice system, the pursuit of a political opponent. You know, it will be up to voters to assess the rhetoric, the language being used, and whether or not that should be taken seriously. And if not, why not? But one thing I would say is on its impact, consider one thing, the recent hurricanes and Donald Trump's encouragement of misinformation. He criticized efforts by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Subsequently, a man was arrested in North Carolina for threatening FEMA workers.
County Sheriff's Office. William Jacob Parsons was carrying a handgun and a rifle when he was taken into custody on Saturday. The 44-year-old was arrested amid a wave of misinformation about FEMA operations and the storm disaster response. Over the weekend, the agency says it evacuated and relocated staff members over safety concerns. And
Mark, I wonder where you are. What are voters saying about all this sharpening of the rhetoric?
Well, no, it's interesting, and it's something I constantly put to those who are supporting Donald Trump, not necessarily the base, the traditional supporters of Donald Trump, those who have turned out for him in the past, but the new supporters, like black folk here in Michigan. I ask them, you know, are you not concerned about his racist rhetoric? Are you concerned about the language he uses? Are you concerned about the fact that the people he surrounded himself by in his last term are now deserting him and say he is, as you just outlined, a fascist? And you get the same response every time. Either they say, look, it's not true. They only say that because they were fired and so they've got an axe to grind. But many of them say, look, he says this stuff, but he doesn't actually mean it. And I think, and we've said this before, I think there is a sort of nostalgia for the Trump days. It goes down to one thing, really, the economy. Yes, the economy may have been better for some people under Donald Trump, but they have an amnesia as well. They seem to forget the chaos within the White House, the division within the White House, the division within America under Donald Trump. They've kind of forgotten that and are looking back to a second Trump term.
That is part one. Do join us after the break when we'll speak to the numbers man, Steve Kornacki, NBC's political pollster, the guru's guru. We'll talk to Steve all about what the numbers are telling us now and what they might tell us come election night. Welcome back to USA 2024 on the road. This week with me, James Matthews, and Mark Stone. I'm delighted to say we're joined by one of the most recognizable faces on American television, NBC's Steve Kornacki. He's the figures man for the US network, the pollster's pollster. Hi, Steve. Great to have you.
James, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We turn up the TV in our office when you come on because you are the guru, the man who takes America through election night with the big screens. And obviously throughout this campaign, you've been on top of the figures, where they are and where they're taking this story. My last question to you, Steve, will be who's going to win, of course. But before we get there, let me ask you just about the broader picture. What's the story of the 2024 election as told by the polls?
It's not so much, I think, what the polls are telling us. It's the questions that the polls are kind of suggesting to us, the key variables that the polls are kind of telling us are there on election night. Big one in terms of Donald Trump is basically a key part of his strength is with voters who don't usually vote. So in our poll, when we've asked folks, did you vote in the 2020 presidential election? Did you vote in the 2022 midterm elections? When the answer is no on either or both of those, especially, Trump does better. And one of the stories in polling has been, Trump has improved his standing with younger voters, younger non-white voters, younger male non-white voters. And a lot of those voters are the ones telling us they don't typically vote. They think they will this time, but that creates a big question mark. Does that actually happen? If it does, obviously it could be a very big night for Donald Trump. But if that's a bit of a mirage, then advantage Democrats.
Yeah, why is that? Why are these people leading Trump?
It's an interesting question. And, some of it, when you start talking about younger male voters, there's been talk of kind of a UFC effect. Trump, especially since leaving the presidency. So this is not anything to do with when he was president, but in the 4 years since, he and his team have really cultivated. He's shown up at UFC fights. He's been doing a number of podcasts that aren't really that political, but that have very large audiences of young male voters, also a lot of young male non-white voters who are in there too. And so I think that his campaign has really cultivated that and has seen an opportunity in especially kind of the male demographic that, the Democratic coalition has become a little bit more, female, especially Democrats are driving up massive support now with younger women, younger single women. These groups are becoming a more prominent part of the Democratic coalition. And to every action, there's an opposite reaction. And I think the Trump folks see an opportunity there on the other side of that equation.
Yeah, in terms of the Democrats, with Biden post-debate, they were falling through the floor. Harris came in, she enjoyed a bump, but the polls now are sticking for her. Tell me the story of the Democrats in the past few weeks.
Yeah, Biden had all sorts of problems, obviously, in the polling, but some of the most glaring weak spots for Biden had been among groups that are typically a core part of the Democratic Party coalition: Hispanic voters, Black voters, younger voters. And since Harris got in the race, the Democratic standing with those groups has improved. Now, it's not where Democrats would like it to be. And it may not even be at the level where it needs to be for Democrats to win. It is better for them than where it was with Biden. But for instance, since 1964, no Republican candidate has won 20% even of the Black vote, going back that far. So when you say that the Black vote's a core part of the Democratic coalition, you're talking like 90-10, 92-8. Those are the typical margins. With Hispanic voters, it's a bit of a different story. Trump had made some ground up there in 2020. It was a pretty big story in 2020. It's a lot of indications in the polling that he's made further strides this time. Harris is improved again from where Biden was, but I think that's the biggest area of slack that still exists in what you would call the traditional Democratic coalition.
Where will the election be won? There's a lot of talk about voters in the middle, independents, soft Republicans who may switch. Where is that demographic both candidates want to connect with?
Yeah, typically, I think the suburbs, and there's sort of two kinds of suburbs. The Democratic support has been growing and really exploding. And demographically, what that is this is sort of professional class, college educated, often higher income. These voters once upon a time leaned Republican, sort of on pocketbook issues, but I think more on cultural issues and on a reaction to Donald Trump himself. They've really become aligned with the Democratic Party. Well, in some suburbs, that transformation is kind of complete, and it's just a question of how big a margin will the Democrats drive up on election night. But there's another rung of suburb, and we'll see this in Georgia, one of the key states. We'll see this in Wisconsin, one of the key states, North Carolina, another one. Some suburban areas, suburban counties that are still very Republican. And the question there is, the Democrats have made progress there. They're not getting blown out by as much now as they were, say, 8 or 12 years ago, but it's still going to be a Republican county. My question there is, in the last 4 years, has Trump sort of stopped the bleeding in those counties, or is there going to be further progress for Democrats there? We're talking about voters here who I think are still very unpersuaded by the Democratic Party, still do not want to vote for Democrats. But there is a question there of, can they get to a place where they're going to vote for Trump?
Do you see much scope for shifting? And if there is late shifting at this stage of the game, why will that be? Why will there be a shift?
Well, they always, the cliche is the October surprise. They call it, right? There's some major event that happens in the closing days or weeks of the campaign that sort of reshuffles, perceptions and affects the outcome. And I mean, in a year like we've had, you've always got to leave that possibility open. Of course, just given how much upheaval there's already been in this race, the bar for something to really move voters that dramatically has got to be pretty high as well, which is why I think there's also a bigger question from my standpoint just of turnout. And that's a cliche to say, too, that it's all going to come down to turnout. But it's so clear where each candidate's strengths and weaknesses are demographically. And so the question is one of those demographic coalitions going to turn out at a disproportionate level? Is a gap going to emerge there? Are the suburbs going to be absolutely on fire with turnout? And then we talked about at the beginning, these voters that Trump's been cultivating, these sort of new voters, we don't know if they're going to turn out. Do they maybe not turn out at the level they're suggesting in polls? There's a disparity that would favor Democrats big time. So it's that sort of thing that I think I'm really keyed in on too.
Let me ask you a question about polling per se. The polls have got it wrong, Stephen, in the past. Talk to me about the methodology and why we should trust the polls this time.
Not sure you should. And be honest about that. And I try to convey that when we're talking about polls. First of all, they are extremely close this time. I mean, in 2016 and really in 2020, if you remember, the polls were consistently showing Biden pretty significantly, ahead of Donald Trump. Now we're seeing polls that are, Harris is up 2. It's a tie. Trump is up 1. I mean, we're in a very different range to start with this time. But the issue in 16 and in 20, I think, was much more geographically and demographically specific. And that is to say, the polls weren't way off in every battleground state in 2020. They were actually quite good in Georgia, in Arizona, southern states. Where they missed badly was that northern tier of battleground states. Wisconsin, in both 16 and 20, the polling was way off. It was like the worst miss in the country both times. And each time, I think the final polling average in Wisconsin in 2020 had Joe Biden ahead by 8.5 points. The final margin was 0.6 of 1 point. 20,000 votes. I mean, way off. Michigan, not quite as bad, but bad. And what that is in 16, it was clear in those states in particular, they have large populations of blue-collar white voters. Demographically, these are white voters who don't have 4-year degrees. This is a group that, just we talk about the suburbs becoming much more Democratic, blue-collar white voters have become much more Republican. And in a state like Michigan, Wisconsin, they were traditionally, until very recently, a core part of the Democratic coalition. So this becoming, sort of Republican voters is new in those states, and it just dramatically accelerated with Donald Trump. So that was not accounted for in 2016. There were efforts to account for it in 2020, and those efforts failed. And there's all sorts of theories why. And I don't think there's a clear, compelling answer out there. I mean, one theory is just that it was sort of linked to very COVID-specific circumstances. Maybe that's it. Maybe just sort of being beyond COVID now will do away with it. There's other, theories about these are voters who do not want to answer polls, will not talk to pollsters. So, we really don't know. But what I keep in mind is, it wasn't random. There was a very specific thing that happened in both elections. So I'm very mindful of, could that happen again?
You're a staple of election night coverage in the United States on NBC at the big board and the screens and everything else. Steve, you take us through the night on this side of the Atlantic. Talk to me about election night and how is it for you? A long shift, yeah?
It is, but it doesn't feel that way. There's just too much happening. When I think back to election nights, I remember the events, but I couldn't put a timestamp on most of them because it's a blur to me. I'll look up and you'll tell me it's 11:30, it's 1 a.m. I really can't tell, other than knowing when the poll closing times are in some of these states. So it happens real fast.
Now, Steve, I've got a question here from Kylan, a highly valued American colleague who's seeing us through the election. She has a lot to do with our podcast, a very straight talker in the way you Americans are. She was 5 minutes, I can tell you, in our DC bureau, and she said, "It sounds like Downton Abbey in here." So from Kylan, there is a question here, and I'll read it. Steve, are you continuing your trend of wearing khakis? If so, is Gap still the place to get them? There you go, a wardrobe note. Tell me about that.
Well, I haven't bought new ones since 2020. So wherever they were from then, they still are now. I say this is a thing I never in a million years thought I would be answering questions about my pants. That's one of the weirdest things that happened in 2020. I don't fully understand it. I don't know, I guess, is the answer. I got to see how I feel. I think people might have got the impression that it's like these pants are some great attachment that I have and I always wear it. It just happened that I was wearing them that week in 2020. So I don't know. We'll see if my bosses have a strong feeling about it.
Yeah, well, we're going to be looking out for the lucky khakis, Steve, I assure you, come election night. And on election night, I have to ask you, who's going to win?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we've been pouring over a lot of different numbers and everything, and I got to say, I think I've pretty much got it narrowed down to 2.
You rascal! Which one?
It's as much as you're getting out of me.
All right, Steve. Listen, great. Many thanks for your time. We know you're a busy man. Very glad that you could be with us, and good luck on election night.
Hey, thanks, James. You too.
Mark, let's come back to you. Talk there from Steve of how close it all is, how both candidates are targeting, particular demographics as we approach polling day. We saw that with Kamala Harris, didn't we? She was interviewed by Fox News this week. Anchorman Brett Baer, that pulled in an audience of 7.1 million, 3 times his average. I wonder, what did you make of that interview?
It was fascinating. She went where no Democrat likes to go. She went to Fox News. She went to the other side to try and draw in votes because she needs every vote. It was a gamble for her, certainly, to do this interview. Remember, she's been criticized for not having done very many interviews at all, and she hasn't certainly done any combative interviews. But in an election so unbelievably close, less than 3 weeks to go, she knew it was a gamble she needed to take because she needs to reach that new audience. There are undecideds out there who will decide this election. Many of them are Republicans, but Republicans who do not like Trump. And she needs to draw them to her side. And of course, Fox News is where she'll find many of them. It was combative for sure, very combative. The interviewer, veteran Fox News host Brett Baer, who kind of looks like what everyone would imagine an anchorman to look like. He gave her a hard time. He gave her the sort of grilling that she has consistently avoided. At times you could see in her face that she didn't think it was going well. Immigration was the key theme that he wanted to push, and her answers were evasive, to say the least. She threw it back to Trump the whole time. She didn't answer the question. She didn't outline any policies that would make Americans' lives any better. She threw it back to Trump. And as you said earlier in the podcast, and what I thought was really interesting, is that she's pivoted away from her joy and future and hope agenda that she was pitching just a few weeks ago. She's gone back to the old Biden pitch that Donald Trump is a grave danger to democracy. Ultimately, did she win or lose any votes? I think people are so locked in.
That wraps it up for this week. Many thanks to you for joining us on the road as we cover USA 2024. Speaking of road, we're fast running out of it. It will be 2 weeks and counting till election night the next time we speak. Do join us then.